Greetings of peace. Welcome to our breakout panel. We will wait a minute or two so everyone can enter and join the room. Thank you for being with us today and for your interest in this very important and up-to-date topic. I can see that slowly people are joining us. I do hope we are going to have a nice crowd, a nice audience. Our panelists are already here, and shortly we will begin the webinar. And feel free to use the chat option to either introduce yourself, either ask a question, or tell us something about yourself as well. And I already see Sarah is asking us to join in and use the chat option as well. So we will slowly begin. And as people are joining us, I hope they will be able to catch up with everything. But again, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you watch us and where you are joining us from. Before the very start, I would just like us to go through some of the house rules and information that we would like to share. First of all, as you could see, we are going live, and also this webinar is being recorded. All the conversations and presentations will be in English. We very much appreciate and welcome your participation. So please write your comments in the chat or raise questions also in Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I will pick the questions after the presentations, but unfortunately, we are not able to take any direct questions through raised hands. Also, you can share your own experiences or your own thoughts on the questions that we will discuss with our panelists. And I'm sure there is a huge amount of experience in our room, or better say in our Zoom here. And in the meantime, it would be great if you could introduce yourself in chat. Let us know your profession, where you come from, and your motivation to join us today. So, multi-religious actors working together in community, regional, or local and global levels have shown to be very effective in building peace in their local context. As we engage with questions around religious actors being instrumentalized, we are also witnessing a moment where multi-religious voices for moral dignity and shared well-being are becoming more prominent. However, even though multi-religious efforts are coming into a greater prominence, the role of youth and the role of women in leading multi-religious efforts and initiatives are often overlooked or overshadowed. So in this session with our panelists, we will center the perspectives of women and youth involved in multi-religious peace-building efforts, and we will learn about what effective women and youth-led collaboration looks like in countering hate, in building peace, but also social cohesion in our societies. We will also learn about how we can better listen, better support, but also better partner and fund multi-religious actors and efforts. But let me start by introducing myself as well. My name is Emina Frljak. I'm coming from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm a program coordinator with local-led and local organization called Youth for Peace from Bosnia and Herzegovina. But I'm also International Youth Committee member of Religions for Peace. And I have the privilege to moderate this session today. So I'm really delighted to moderate this inspiring and motivated panel. And today with us, we have Samira Fatma Baruchia. We have Dr. Aisha Kadayefci Oreyana, Sarah Rahim, and Shahid Rahmat. Welcome, dear speakers, and thank you very much for being with us. So our panelists will share their thoughts and experiences on the three questions for today's discussion. And the first issue on the table for the discussion is, what is the current state or challenge of women and youth-led multi-religious engagement in peace building? And dear audience, we would like to hear also your opinions and your on this question. So feel free to share it in the chat with us, and we will pick up the comments on the way. Our first speaker today is Samira Fatma Baruchia, and she works as a regional coordinator for the URI multi-region. URI stands for United Religions Initiative. She is an activist. She's trying to facilitate dialogue, interfaith work, and reinforce the importance of living together for the sake of peace and security. The work Samira is doing locally is done through a youth-led, youth-funded organization called Youth for Peace. And Samira, the Zoom is all yours for the next 4 minutes.
Well, hello, everyone. Greetings of peace. I'm delighted to be joining you all tonight from Bosnia and Herzegovina. Amina, thank you for this kind introduction. I'm really honored to be here. As you kindly noted, I work for URI, which stands for United Religions Initiative, and URI is a grassroots network of organizations from all around the world, trying to do interfaith dialogue for the sake of achieving the goal of peace, justice, and healing. We have more than 1,000 groups around the world in more than 100 countries, and I am very blessed and privileged to be able to be in a role where I get to support different initiatives around the world. And Amina, thank you for phrasing this question in the way you did, because it didn't just give me a task of sort of, okay, so let's figure out the notes of what I need to say during the webinar, but it sent me to a reflective spot in my personal life. Okay, so as a young person and as a woman, what kind of challenges do I see? And I tried to isolate just one. That was not possible. But rather I have a list of things that came to mind as I was thinking about youth and women's engagement, and especially youth, because I feel that has characterized my work on the local level and global level most often. And one challenge that I like to bring forward for all of us to think about is the myth of young people just not being there, that young people are not active, that young people are not in spaces where they need to be. I strongly believe, and I've experienced this, that this is a myth, and we have to work towards dissolving this myth for the sake of actual inclusion of young people, but also women in meaningful processes and offering equal opportunity for participation. So that's sort of the first thing that came to mind. We're not mythical beings that pop up from the shadows from time to time. We are there. We're a part of the context where we live. It's just a matter of how much you want to see us and how much you accept our existence in certain spaces. Another challenge that I see is that young people and women are often tokenized. And it means that on a panel of 5 or 10 people, you're trying to get one young person or one woman just because of representing diversity. If we're going to achieve diversity only for the sake of it being one more thing on our checklist, then we're doing diversity wrong. And something that I've learned from my mentor and my colleague from URI, her name is Perry McCary. She's a global council trustee for URI. And she taught me this: never ask who is in the room, but rather ask who's not in the room. And this has become my guiding principle when trying to achieve that principle of diversity in everything that we do. Really trying to think about who's not there and why they're not here. Do we all have equal opportunities? Do we all have equal grounds from which we stand on and we start from? I feel that is really important. And the last thing that I'll briefly mention in a few seconds is doing this NGO work that we all do, being a peace builder and an activist, is a privilege, because not everyone is able to be employed and do this full time. For a lot of people, they do this as volunteer work. And we have to appreciate every second of their time that they're able to contribute towards. And I think that's a big challenge because not many people have the privilege to be able to work in this field.
Thank you so much, Samira. And I could relate with so many things that you said as a young woman, coming from the same context that you come. I could definitely relate with being tokenized from time to time, but also with, popping up when it's needed. And thank you for mentioning the fact that many people are also volunteering and dedicating their free time to this kind of work. And we often don't appreciate all of the interfaith efforts done by those volunteer groups, unfortunately. But thank you so much again for these insights. And now this leads me to our next speaker. And our next speaker is Dr. Ayşe Kadayıfçı Orellana. And Dr. Kadayıfçı is an affiliate researcher at the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace and Security. Her work has addressed Muslim women's peacebuilding initiatives, religion and conflict resolution, Islamic approaches to peace and war, but also Islam and nonviolence. And Dr. Kadayıfçı, let us hear from you.
Thank you so much, Amina. This is an honor to be with all of you. And thank you so much, Samira, for your contributions as well, because I think we've shared similar experiences in so many ways. I first started working in the space of religion and peace building rather than women and peace building in 1997. This was before 9/11. And this was not a topic that was really interesting to many people at the time. But unfortunately, 9/11 happened. But after 9/11, there were only very few people, especially women, Muslim women in particular, focusing on the role of religion as a source of peace building. So having been tokenized as the only woman to become the face of that. But I used that as an opportunity to go and work in different areas. I was fortunate to work with Dr. Mohammed Abu Nimr. We found an organization called Salam Institute for Peace. And I did a lot of interfaith dialogue work. I did a lot of imam trainings. And one of the things that happened was because I was the only woman, not only Muslim woman, but only woman who was in that space, I started asking, like Samir was saying, who's not here? Why are there no other women? And I was much younger at the time. So as a young Muslim woman, I started looking for people. But one of the things that, after 9/11, there was a lot of emphasis on we have to engage religious actors. One thing that we saw that was happening, which was a challenge, the way religious actors, the criteria was defined was excluding and ignoring women of faith. And so all these rooms were filled with men. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was to invite more women into the conversation. So that was a work that I had to work with the organizers. And one of the things that you would hear was that, but there are no women, especially. So then I reached out for sort of support from women, peace and security groups, and they were very secular. Coming from a particular feminist secular interpretation. And they had the misunderstanding that Muslim women were these voiceless, agency-less actors who needed to be saving. And religion in general, not only the Muslims, but women of faith were not able to, or did not have the voice. So there was a lot of, let us save Muslim women, let us save, and there was, but that wasn't also very helpful either. So one of the things that I made a mission was to try to educate both groups of the importance of women of faith. And there was really some of the challenges that we faced was, first of all, you would go and say, but there's no one doing this work. On the contrary, there was so much women of faith doing this work that needed to be sort of emphasized. And so I start writing about the role of women in these different places. So I started focusing on who is doing what, identifying their stories, their successes, to show that they had unique skill sets and unique perspectives that actually can complement the other peace processes. But in addition to this, secular views, as well as organizers privileging males because they want to be culturally sensitive. There was also, in addition to misunderstanding of the cultural context, there was a lot of patriarchal roadblocks within these communities as well. So there was less emphasis on women religious leaders and the way they interpret religious texts. And there was a lot of gaps in the women's education to argue for more women's inclusion, for more women's rights. So we start working on how do we empower those women in these areas as well. So in addition to those, especially youth are also were in the same boat in so many ways. They were their voices where they don't have enough experience, etc. But once we have identified that women as well as, youth can play a constructive role, because they can be also, especially the youth, can be very vulnerable to these violence in their communities. So we have started focusing more and more in the role of women and women's relation with youth. And I think that we still have a long way to go, but I think we did succeed in making some of those stories heard and recognize the role that they could be doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kadauchi, and for bringing this female perspective and for all the pioneer work that you did and somehow made a path for all of us to join and then make the movement even larger. Now we will hear from our next speaker, Sarah Rahim, who is the head of training and design at Collaborate Up. Sarah is a self-proclaimed social impact enthusiast, community builder, and a storyteller. She's passionate about building common ground and harnessing the power of diversity as a force for good. So Sarah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Amina. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's panel. And also just for my fellow panelists, it's wonderful to see familiar faces. I think that's a testament to how powerful our work is in the interfaith, intercultural space, and also how I think saturated and in a good way, right? Seeing familiar names and faces. So in terms of how I would address this question, I think, I've worn a lot of different hats. So I've probably in the past decade, I've really zigzagged my way through the social sector. I've been both a policymaker, at least working on that space, helping advocate for policy. And I've also been on the grounds, right, as an implementer. Worked with a variety of interfaith and intercultural organizations around the world, Interfaith Youth Corps, A Common Word Among the Youth, ACWE, Parliament of the World's Religions. And I can say this time and time again, right? I think we often talk about youth engagement or women's engagement. And I think the crux of the matter is we clearly have young people doing the work, right? We clearly have women in these spaces doing the work. And I think the challenge or the current state of it is really moving beyond that tokenization to active inclusion, right? Not just being sidelined, as our fellow panelists have talked about. Because, I'll often even just see, for a certain policy form I helped organize recently, right? It's maybe young people or women might just get a token place on a panel, or we might just get a separate day of planning, when the question here is, how are we ensuring that these marginalized identities are actively included from the beginning of the process, right? So I think my challenge here, or really when I think of the current state, is being able to move away from just, again, that tokenization mentality to seeing young people specifically as a trusted resource or a candidate, right? A trusted, credible member of the design process. For example, my work in international development right now, we talk a lot about this term localization, right? How are we elevating local voices? How are we engaging partners locally? And for me, the push is, moving engagement away from being a tick boxing exercise to just actually engaging them and doing that power sharing to begin with. So I would argue that generally there is a presence. I wouldn't say there's a lack of young people or a lack of women doing the work, but really, how do we move them to the front of the peace building or engagement process from the get-go, right? Being seen as an active stakeholder from the beginning. And also just frankly, getting more nuanced in the conversation. Historically, we've just seen interfaith dialogue to be purely Abrahamic, right? You've got a Christian, a Muslim, and a Jew. I think, given that it's 2022, almost 2023, and just frankly, the past 10 to 15 years of amazing work that young people have been doing all over the world, I think it's okay if we get more nuanced, right? So how are we engaging people of no faith? How are we engaging other identities that have been historically sidelined? How are we doing the intra-faith just as much as we're doing the interfaith? Right. So I think that's where we need to move, is getting more nuanced, getting more into the weeds of it, and acknowledging that young people and also women and other folks who have historically been sidelined, they do have a stake in the conversation. So that's where I'm hoping our next decade or so of work will kind of go, because at the end of the day, it's clearly true based off the people in this room and this conversation is that we are here, we're present, and we're doing the work. So I'll pass it back to Amina.
Wow, thank you so much. And I could definitely relate with so many things, but power sharing is super important. And I think we don't know how to do that. The power mostly stays at certain smaller groups, and all the others are there to be, but not to share this power. And definitely the question of involving people of different religions and involving people of no religion, I think is a huge question and a huge task for all of us working in the interfaith sphere, and something that we need to think of when organizing any kind of events and when talking about the interfaith as well. And all of this is super important, and I do hope that in the next year and in the decades to come, we will find ways to resolve these questions, but it's important that we start raising them, that we are aware of them, and that there are people who will somehow push towards that. So this leads me to the only male on our panel, and I'm very grateful that we have Shahid with us. And Shahid Rahmat is Executive Director of Youth Development Foundation. He is a peace activist and social entrepreneur with a decade of working experience in countering violent extremism, interfaith harmony, youth leadership, conflict mitigation, and tolerance in the post-conflict zones and sensitive geographic areas of Pakistan. And you can read more about Shahid in the chat. And Shahid, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Amina. It's pleasure to be part of this very energetic and very charismatic and the lot of females around me. So I'm so happy to learn about your stories and your work, what you are doing, and of course meeting with the old friend like Sarah, and we met in Singapore for like 4 or 5 years ago, and we are keep. Like supporting each other through different platforms. So it's pleasure, it's honor. I'm Shahid Rahmat from Pakistan, and I was a banker to turn to be a peace activist, because when I started my work, I saw a lot of exclusion and discrimination in the society, and that even my colleague were not ready to accept me. And then I got an opportunity to step back and think, can I do something to change this, or I have to continue to face this every day? And then I took step, and I founded this organization with my couple of friends, and we started from one room, and slowly it's become a movement, and the biggest and one of the largest movement in Pakistan. We have more than 20,000 alumni right now in the more than 35 district, and the proud moment while I was listening to you guys is, for me, is like we have more than 7,000 females, young females, part of our network, and they are from very diverse background. Like some are from universities, communities, and the young professional. Even though we have the young madrasa girls whom are part of our network, and they are supporting us on their villages, on the community levels in initiatives, and that's giving us more opportunity to go and focus in the communities, because females are very much connected with their localities, their community, and they become our gateway to go in the community and try to convince them and motivate them and inspire them to be part of our movement, how we can build a tolerant, inclusive, and more peaceful society in Pakistan. So if so many things but the other panelists already discussed, but I just wanted to highlight as that Pakistan is also not a very famous country for the interreligious dialogue, because so many taboos are associated with this topic. And when you say you are going to have an interreligious dialogue, people think you are doing something for the conversion of other people. So when I started this, even though the university student, first they joined my activities online and they become a part of that. But in the morning, we got a call that my parents are not allowing me to come and to be part of this difficult discussion. So that was a setback for us, that how we can, even though the university students are really much controlled by it's a family system, very strong here. So even though the youngster whom are studying, they need to, and they have to listen to their parents once they go in these sensitive discussions, because it's a matter of their safety and security and everything. So what we, in our experience and working from almost a decade on so many locations in 3 provinces of Pakistan, like religious barriers are very much there. Like, so the people they only want to see the one-sided picture, and they only want to follow, and they are, sometimes they are taught in this way that you have to follow this and don't listen to others. So there are religious factors. So the young people they just try to control themselves and they close themselves exactly. So not be a part of other activity in which they can interact with the young people from different religion, ethnic, and sects. And then there is a lot of, I already told, there is a misinformations, there is taboos, there's a lot of hearsay information from their previous generation. So my father was saying this, my grandfather was saying this, that the Hindus are like this, that the Christians are like this. So we should not go and talk with them, and they cannot be our friends. So these are the barriers. These are they have a weightage, or they have all these information which are not based on the right information, and they are not very much convinced to research and to get the proper information, what they are saying, if this is correct or not. And then a lot of the misinformation is already on the social media, and especially where we were working in the communities with we try to work in a KPK, the border side with Afghanistan. So and then we work in a Karachi when the gang war was there. So we tried to convince the both groups and to have a reconciliation process. So there were a lot of efforts, and they are very smart to using the social media to just try to spread the misinformation. And that's, we clearly saw when the pandemic was there. So in Pakistan, people try to associate and attach the COVID with the different sect, and they're saying they are the super spreader. They're coming from different the border side, and they are spreading this virus. So we have to stop them. We have to. So they try to exclude the people from different. So the lot of misinformation, and the home people are troublemaker. They are very smart. They're using the social media, the different medium to spread their misinformation. And the very big gap which we felt at the government level, there is not a lot of policies whom are supporting these initiatives. If the young people try to be to do something with the support of the government, they don't have much support and backup from the government side, like the policy, their opportunities, their platform. So then the culture is especially for the females, the culture is very much important. Like when we go to the village side, they're saying our girls are not going to interact with the males, and even though they are not going in these sort of activities where you are going to talk about this, you are coming here to spoil us. And so many times we have the people thrown stone on us when we were in Karachi and we went in a community, and they say go back from our community, and we try to convince them we came here only to have a peaceful discussions, not anything else. So these are the challenges which I try to cover everything in a short amount of time. But thank you very much. I'm happy to continue the discussion later.
Of course, we have 2 more rounds, so there will be time to share more about the work you do and about all the amazing initiatives. But 3 very important things that you brought to us is how interfaith is understood in our own contexts. As you said, sometimes people see it as way to convert for conversion, or a way that you're trying to convert somebody. And this is probably in many other contexts. You also brought a very important thing on social media and how do we use social media for also creating interfaith spaces, because social media is not bad, is not good either, but it can be used for this or for that. And I see it much more used for the bad things. So it's a question for us who are working in the interfaith, how do we use social media to boost our efforts and somehow also, I don't know, move interfaith to the social media as well, not just on the grounds where we work. So thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts. This is really insightful. And I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on our next questions. And our second round of discussion is on the inclusion opportunities. My next question for all of you is, how do we engage with and how we can be inclusive of women and youth, but also other historically marginalized faith communities and indigenous faith traditions in these efforts? Because a lot of Sarah already mentioned that people who are not belonging to Abrahamic religions or people who are belonging to the indigenous faith traditions, how do we engage with them as well? They're often overlooked and, put aside from these gatherings and from the interfaith efforts. And I will also like to encourage once again our audience to share their thoughts and their experiences on this question, but on also previous question using the chat option. And we are also going to use the same order. So Samira, it's time again to hear from you.
Thank you, Amina, and thanks everyone for your contributions. I don't see this as a panel. I see this as a very meaningful conversation, to be honest. And the questions that Amina is asking are very thought-provoking, and I hope that the audience experiences them in the same manner as well. I mean, I agree with everything that the people before me said, and I feel it's more challenging now to respond to the question after hearing everyone's input than before when I just had my own thoughts, because your sharings provoked certain processes in my mind. But when it comes to ensuring meaningful participation, I think that we are in a moment where we actually get to do something that's different. We get to challenge the status quo. We get to challenge tokenism and all other aspects that are problematic in our social lives and existence right now. But I want to urge us to be patient and to be very collaborative with the process, because it does take time for things to change. Patterns that existed for decades or even centuries are not that easy to change. But I do see certain changes happening around the world. And because right now I work in URI and in the framework that URI created over 20 years ago. And URI is guided by a set of principles. So we have our famous PPPs, which are preamble, purpose, and principles that have framed the entire organization. And I would just like to point at a few of these principles that really that are helping me pay attention to aspects of work that I might overlook while doing what I do. For example, respect the sacred wisdom of each religion, spiritual expression, and indigenous tradition. Seek and welcome the gift of diversity. Listen and speak with respect and deepen mutual understanding and trust. These are just 3 out of 21 principles that are helping us navigate our work towards what we're trying to achieve, and that's the culture of peace, justice, and healing. And it's one thing to have all these principles on paper and to read them out loud, and we all feel so proud of what we've achieved and the roots that we have. But how do we put that in practice? What's the practical application of what we're talking about? And that can be difficult. But I do strongly believe that addressing the issue of tokenism, ensuring meaningful representation in positions of leadership, not because we need one young person or one woman sitting somewhere, but that we are willing to incorporate the perspective that they're bringing for the benefit of all. And absolutely encouraging and supporting youth-led spaces and initiatives is very important, because they come with a fresh set of eyes, I think. And we do need to find ways how to get them in place. often I hear that we need separate spaces for youth so the youth can feel empowered. And I feel that Sarah addressed this briefly in her answer to the first question. What I want to emphasize is that in URI, we do not have a separate body that's there only for youth empowerment or engagement. It is very important that young people and women are represented in the highest bodies of governance of the organization, not just there as a supportive body that's there to brainstorm and then send the ideas to the elders. I think it's very important to mix people of different ages, sexes, religious, spiritual, and indigenous traditions all together, and draw from that sacred wisdom that comes with each individual, and design the processes and the leadership that works for a certain group, and with that, really ensure that every voice not just is present, but that it really counts and that it matters. I've been in situations where I've been asked for my thoughts, but then my thoughts don't manifest in any way. I just share them, and that's about it, which is really frustrating for a young person, because I've put certain work into it, and then what happens? Where did I go? What did I change? And it's important for us to start thinking about it and start the change that we need to see. I will share a resource in the chat box for everyone who's interested to see it. It's a toolkit that was designed by a number of young people from URI on meaningful youth participation. It started from a pamphlet and ended up being a toolkit. So I do encourage everyone to check it out and to see if there are resources that might be beneficial for your work. But it takes time, and it takes patience and certain persistence, and we should not give up.
Thank you, Samira, for your thoughts and for mentioning a very important thing, and that is having youth and women in the leadership positions and not creating separate spaces, because separate spaces do not encourage dialogue, especially the intergenerational one that we need to strive for. That is something that is, I would say, sine qua non, or a condition that we cannot live without in the world that we are living today. And thanks for the toolkit. Please share it with us, and you're already sharing in the chat, so I'm sure it will bring more wisdom to all of us here in the panel, and I'm sure some of us will find it very useful in our work. So without further ado, I will just pass the question to our next speaker, and Dr. Kadayıfçı, please, the floor is yours again.
Thank you so much. Yes, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to work with a number of different indigenous women's groups in Chile, as well as in Guatemala and South Africa. But I also, from them, I've learned a completely new perspective. But one of the works that I sort of realized that in terms of making interfaith dialogues, interreligious cooperation more effective, one of the things that's really, really crucial is to identify divisions within a single group and to do an intra-group dialogue on issues that are really contentious. And I think that to me was very important in sort of helping people feel more secure, to be more open to the others. So that was something that I learned. The other thing that I think is very important is to be able to sort of incorporate a gender-sensitive analytical perspective to identify who needs to be there. And one thing that we often do is sort of think about women or men as if they were single categories. In each group, we have different orientations, different interpretations, different tribal, ethnic backgrounds. So having an intersectional perspective and identifying who are the most vulnerable groups, who is not present at the table. I loved what Samira was saying, but ask not who's at the table, but who's not at the table is really important for us to sort of make sure that we're not missing any voices. And one of the other things that's really important is that we tend to focus in the conflict resolution, peace building space for those key actors who have the power to influence others. While this is very important, our definition of power can be very limiting. I think it's really important for us to redefine or understand different definitions of power. And rather than seeing some people that have no power, seeing the powers that they already have that may be different. For example, they may have the power of status, they may have the power of knowledge, they may have the power of experience. So how do we sort of make sure that we sort of recognize people's powers that they already have, and then making sure that we give them the space to experience that is also very important. Another thing that I learned that's really important is to have approaches that are community driven and participatory. But it has to be done in such a way that, community traditions can be very exclusive, very discriminatory. But it's the responsibility of the facilitators to make sure that we understand what are some of the historical mistrusts, historically marginalized groups, and how are each of them impacted, and create platforms and opportunities and spaces for people to come to an understanding in a safe environment to reach out to others. I do think being an ally is really important. Unfortunately, in many occasions, we tend to focus on what we need in a situation rather than, let's see, what others need. And when we're not in need, we don't always think about how we can reach our hands to the others. I think having that attitude change in our communities to work with people who are marginalized and excluded is really important to have it in our, like, not just wait for the being called to the action, but creating that sensitivity to be there for others is really, really important. And I think we really need to be sensitive to what people think they need rather than, what we think they need, and then listening to them respectfully and having a learning attitude is really, really important. But and engaging males, I think that's really training, engaging and working with male allies is very important as well. I think these are both for women as well as youth. These are strategies that I think could transcend and apply to both cases. Thank you.
Dr. Kadaichi, you brought so many important things like intersectionality, something that we often overlook, just putting people in the boxes. This is this religion, this is that religion, without taking into account all the other identities that come with this religion, that comes and that somehow define the people. You also brought very important thing about the needs of the people, the needs. Often we think that we know what people need without asking them, and this is something that definitely needs to be incorporated into interfaith and multi-religious efforts if we want to make them more inclusive. And you also mentioned the interfaith, which Sarah also mentioned, and often there are some interreligious events happening, and sometimes people of same faith don't want to come together because of these internal issues that are happening. Sometimes people decline because somebody from the same religion but from the different sect or different denomination will be there, and this is a very important issue that we need to also take into account when bringing people to the table and when being inclusive, because we sometimes bring people from the major denomination and without thinking of all those minor denominations, minority denominations that are existing within the same religion. And if we want to be inclusive, we need to have this in mind as well. But and I also want to use just shortly to remind our audience, if the chat function is not working, please use Q&A to put your comments or your questions, because that function is working, but the chat for some reason is not working. So please use the Q&A for this. And let's hear from Sarah once more.
Thanks, Amina. So this is a great question, and I'm going to actually put on my hat of like USAID today, which I know it's also partially sponsoring the forum, but in my day-to-day, I help government officials think about how to do international development more inclusively. So I'm going to drop a reference in the chat, and my caveat is, while this is relevant to folks in international development, I also argue that it's relevant to people in peace building, right? And when you're developing multi-stakeholder partnerships. So the tool or the term I'd like to bring to the table is co-creation, right? We've probably all heard of that term in some way. The way that I define co-creation, it's a design approach that brings people together to collectively produce a mutually valued outcome using a participatory process that assumes some degree of shared power and decision-making, right? So again, for me, it's a design approach that is bringing people to the table. It's engaging them in power sharing. And, I think co-creation in itself, while it's a tool, for me, it's widely described as, a shift in organizational thinking, right? So how do we move away from the organization to define the problem, to create a more participatory process, right? Where we're engaging, again, young people, women, historically sidelined, to kind of start at the beginning of the process and really help generate and develop meaning and identify the process, right? So I guess what I would argue is the ability to be more engaging is build in tangible, tactful tools to bring these voices to the start, right? So if you're about to design an interfaith event, if it's, I don't know, an interfaith iftar, if it's a dialogue, if it's a 2-day forum, ensure that you're bringing those voices in from the agenda setting process, right? So being very clear on people's roles, giving folks the chance to brainstorm, to help shape the agenda. All of those things, I believe, will operationalize that inclusion, right? Versus defining the problem yourself and then handing it to someone to speak about their experience. So I think there's very tactful ways to bring people in. It also just, frankly starts with building trust, right? And asking yourself who needs to be a part of this. So again, a huge push, at least in the international development space, again, it's localization, right? So if you're entering a different culture or context, engaging locals to actually ask them, like, what is the problem we're actually trying to solve here? And asking them for referrals, who should I invite to this, right? And being very tactful there and allowing time to build that safe and brave space. Whether you're running a one-day workshop, multiple meetings, or, an iftar, whatever that is. So I think being very specific about how you're engaging people, that's a very tangible way. But it almost starts at the brainstorm phase, right? As who is missing from this conversation? How do we get access to them, and how do we engage them meaningfully? So if anyone is actually curious about any of these tools, I'm happy to share my email, and I do capacity building on this topic. So dropping that as well. But yeah, passing back to Mina.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for bringing the co-creation to the table and for bringing the toolkit to us as well, for sending it in the chat. And I'm sure it's going to be useful for for a lot of us working in this space. And also thank you for these very tangible examples on how to engage people and how to be more inclusive, from very, very, let's say, simple things like making iftar or any other interfaith activity, and how to actually make people be included from the very beginning, not just creating anything and say, oh, come and join, but actually be a part of the whole process from the very start to the very end. And we are going to hear again from Shahid in this second round. And afterwards, we have one more question. But before that, let's hear from Shahid and let's hear his perspectives on this question.
Thank you very much once again. So it's like, as Adar already said, like my biggest challenge in my more than a decade career for the peace building interreligious dialogue is changing the way the people consider to have an interreligious dialogue. Like when I started this movement, I tried to challenge the old tradition of sitting in a 5-star hotel, smiling to each other, having a cup of tea and coffee, and that's the people who called it the dialogue. On the ground, they are fighting to each other and they are doing a lot of discrimination, but in front of the media and while sitting in a very nice space, they are very nice to each other. So as a young, when we challenge that, like the people were like start hating us and why we are criticizing a lot of things, and because they were thinking that where we are working in the region, it's not easy to have people to convince them to have an interreligious dialogue. But we try to use like to how we can use the powerhouses which we have. Like as I already said, that like we found in the village communities, the females are really powerful because they're running a family. So in the family, females like they have a power to deliver the message to their kids, to their family members. So in this way, your message can travel and the people get attractive what narrative you are trying to build that. And then like we are using every the new method and the old method, how we can have merged both. Like our culture is really rich. I know the most of the countries, they have a very rich culture, welcoming people, hosting them. So trying to meeting each others, having a different space where they can interact. So we are using to making our work inclusive, that how we can use and what we can learn from our cultures the culture of this region, the culture of this subcontinent. So we try to use that culture and try to creating more opportunity for the young people so they can be a part of that. So we are not normally we are not calling it interreligious dialogue, but we are saying that we're going to have a table fellowship. We're going to have a people to people contact, and we are sitting whole day, but we are not talking about the interreligious dialogue. But itself, it's an interreligious dialogue when a people from different sect and faith, they are sitting together and they are trying to fight for the common issues, and they try to do something for the common goal together. So from culture to technology, we are using, like we are going to initiate one project in which we're going to have a partnership with the Meta. So we're going to have a visual reality, like how we can using the visual reality, we can give the exposure to the people of the different religious sites. So in this way, they can have a physically, if they cannot go other places, so we can use the technology. Technology can help us to use that and to make the things possible which normally are due to the geographical location challenges. In some areas the war is going on, and the some areas the conflict there, the communities are not very open to welcome the people. If and the I just want to raise here that when you are working as NGOs in some part of the world, like people thinking you are working on a Western agenda, and they are not giving you space to get involved and engage their youngsters, their kids, and their family members, especially for their females. So that's, we face a lot of challenges when we are saying that we are a non-profit NGO coming and working for this issue. So we try to use the indigenous method they have, the culture, and how we can put the technology on board and to try to make the things are in the best possible way, so we can make it more inclusive. And in this way, we are getting a lot of help from the number one, from the youngster itself, whom are very motivated, inspired, and they are our gateway in the community. And the second, from the females, like they are talking to the females. Sometimes we have a door-to-door visit also when we go and having something training in the village. So the local girls help us, and they go and try to convince their friends and their mothers to send their daughters for this activity. And the second, we are using a lot of the powerhouse, we call it, the religious leaders. And especially we target the young religious leaders, so they can help us because they have a followers. And sometimes I have seen the million followers they have from their cities. So in 1 minute, they can convince the lot of people, that change the mind of the majority of that community. So using all these things, we are trying to include and make our dialogue, our work mission more inclusive in our space where we are working. Yeah.
Thank you, Shahid. Thank you. I think you already started answering my third question, so I'm looking forward to hear more from you on the third question, because you already started giving some of the examples and something that you are using to make this work actually work. And especially thank you for mentioning your cooperation with Meta, and you're trying to put these things in the virtual space, and actually organizing this kind of a sites visits in the virtual space, because it's definitely more inclusive. Not all of us have the opportunity to visit certain sites. Not all of us have the opportunity to be present somewhere. And there is so many different, people and different categories of people who are going to be able to attend these kinds of meetings. And definitely, this is something that I mentioned at the beginning about social media and how to use online spaces for interfaith dialogue. So as I already said, you somehow started the third question that I wanted to ask. And for now, thank you for all of your contributions. And my last question for this panel and for tonight or for today, depending where we are now, is what are some of examples of effective women and youth-led multi-religious collaboration? Maybe you can share some of your projects or some of the examples that you are aware of, something that you worked on or you're currently working on. And I'm definitely looking forward to hear that from you, because for now, everything was so insightful. I have so many information in my head and so many questions as well raised. But again, I would like to remind our audience to use the Q&A for the questions, but also to use Q&A for their comments or their own ideas and initiatives that they might share with us, because I'm sure there is a lot of wisdom in this Zoom room with us. And now, Samira, I'm giving the mic again to you for this last question.
Thank you, Amina. Well, thinking about this question, I had to go back and review some of my notes and trying to figure out, okay, so what example do I speak about today? In my work, I am blessed to be working with about 80 groups in part of URI that I help coordinate. In these 80 groups, there are 80 great examples of groups and individuals who have managed to do incredible work in the grassroots. What I've tried to do then is to figure out, okay, so what makes them so great? What makes them authentic? What makes them so successful in what they do? And one thing that I've realized is that the success of their stories is based on being true to their own context and developing initiatives and ideas, not because someone else implemented them somewhere and they worked, but they really listened to the grassroots needs of people, young, elder, women, men, does not matter, because a certain issue doesn't affect a specific demographic. It transcends to everything else. Healthcare is not an issue only for women. It's an issue for everyone. Public transportation or public education, it's an issue for each and every individual in our community. And what makes these examples really successful is that they have designed their own response to what the need of their community is. Some of them that I would like to feature is, for example, a cooperation circle called Jerusalem Peacebuilders, which gathers young Palestinians, young Israelis, and young Americans in engaging in really meaningful dialogue about the circumstances of life between Israel and Palestine, and between people who have all of a sudden found themselves on opposite sides. And how does dialogue help us to prevent that? I live in a context of a post-conflict country where dialogue is definitely a necessity, and it's an imperative. Youth for Peace, which is a cooperation circle of URI as well, does incredible work on peace building in this very particular post-conflict country. Eco Peace Teen Cafe, which gathers teenagers from around the world, trying to use the online sphere to participate in different educational programs and be able to share knowledge and skills and just awareness of certain issues. And gosh, there's so many others. Sarah from the United States, or Women's Interfaith Network Cooperation Circle, and so many others that have found their authentic marks to leave in this particular world. I am just inspired by how they managed to transform certain sorrow, sadness, or just heaviness of society and go to a positive with all of that. And I wish we could focus more of our attention, especially on social media, to feature these success stories, because in the fog of all the negative and in the pollution of divisiveness and aggression against the other, all of these amazing stories are sort of overlooked. And I wish to urge all of us to practice individual responsibility when it comes to sharing these stories and really supporting them. One Facebook or Instagram or Twitter post might not mean something to you, but it means to someone else because it multiplies their achievement and their accomplishment in what they did. The last message that I'd like to send is try to meet people where they are. Internet, we've become, I hope, aware of this, but with the pandemic, I started to realize that access to internet is a privilege, unfortunately. And let's try to do our best to find people where they are and meet them where they are, and really try to address the concerns that they have. So deep appreciation and bow to all of my colleagues on the panel. I've learned so much from all of you. And Amina, thank you for brilliant moderation. And I turn it back to you now.
Thank you so much, Samira. Definitely, you mentioned one very important thing is meeting people where they are. And you mentioned the privilege of having access to internet. And recently I facilitated a training on interfaith dialogue in the online sphere. And I was so much, so much privileged to have the access to the internet. But when I saw some people joining from some areas where they really barely have the access to internet, and they were so persistent to be there, they kept coming, even though the connection was just, breaking down and they couldn't come in. So they kept coming because they want to learn, because they want to be present, and they want their voices to be heard. So as you said, it's so important that we who have the privilege find ways how to meet people where they are. Because often in the interfaith sphere, many people who come, they're already there. They already want to be, in the interfaith. They are already somehow, thinking in this kind of way. But how do we meet also people who are hesitant, who don't want to be there, who are questioning, is interfaith something good? Should I be there? Is interfaith something bad or something good? So it's very important to reach out and, also go there, because we live sometimes in the bubble, and we need to somehow break down this bubble. So Samira, thank you very much for bringing this to the panel. And without further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Dr. Kadaichi to hear from her experiences. And I'm sure there is a lot, because she has rich experience in working in this sphere.
Thank you. And thank you, Samira, for all the amazing experiences and stories that you shared with us. And I also been very privileged to work with a lot of amazing women on the ground from Thailand, with Soraya Jamjura, who has been working with Buddhist women who are impacted, Muslim and Buddhist women who are impacted by the conflict, to Ibtisam Ibrahim from Israel, Palestine, to Fatma Bahadli from Iraq, among many other places. I think one thing, I also did a lot of training of trainers for interfaith facilitators in Iraq and other contexts as well. And one thing that I found, that women of faith do actually find it easier to work with each other more than women of faith and secular women. I'm bringing that issue, but I think how we define interfaith can be expanded to include women of non-faith. I think sometimes one of the things that we have been ignoring is the sort of secular, non-religious woman. And so I think that should be expanded. There has been one of the great experiences that I had was we trained a group of Iraqi facilitators, women facilitators on interfaith dialogue and women's participation. And then we had these facilitators to come and facilitate a dialogue among Iraqi women, which included women from Christian, Shia, Sunni, Yazidi backgrounds, as well as secular women. And one of the things that was, they were very nervous because the biggest challenge that they had, and we had very tense moments with the religious and secular women from the same context. But the dialogue process and the way the facilitators that we trained from the ground were so impressive that we got amazing feedback from the ground. And they said this was so important for them that they were also able to talk to others. And I think one of the things that really was important in that experience to work with women facilitators on the ground to help them and give them the tools in how to integrate. And I think sort of helping them and be meeting them where they are, but helping them understand the significance of these has been really, really important for those women as well. So working with the communities on the ground, identifying what their needs are and helping them find sort of a skill set that would help in their own context has been really very rewarding for me. And I've been very impressed. So rather than doing the training ourselves, we like to work with the people who are becoming the trainers in their own context and teach them, or to work with them to adopt it in their own unique context has been very, very important in my work. But that's just one example of I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kadayevchi, and thank you for bringing this, that it's important to empower people who work in the context to work within their own context. Coming from the country that I come from, I learned that there were so many initiatives for peace building in Bosnia that were not taking into account the context, that were not engaging with the people who actually live this kind of context. So when we are doing the peace building work and when we are doing also multi-religious work, it's important to know the context where we go and actually to listen to the people coming from that very context. And that's why your example is so important and it's so valuable, and it gives us this kind of direction in which we should go. Absolutely. And I think now we should hear from Sarah as well, to hear her answer to this question. We already heard many nice examples that she provided us, but I'm sure she has a lot of in her sleeves because she has really rich experience in this field. So Sarah, please, the floor is yours again.
Thanks, Amina. I think there's a lot of really interesting case studies of current youth organizations, right? As mentioned, United Religions Initiative, Interfaith Youth Corps based in the US with whom I've trained. I'm going to reference ACWE, which I think, Amina, you and I met formally in Italy. So there was a G20 forum last year in Italy, which is where we met. So again, it's a small world, great representation. Also Religions for Peace is participant of that, and CAICID. But what makes ACWE unique, and I'll reference that as a case, is that it's entirely youth-led, youth-designed, and youth-driven, right? So it's essentially a fully volunteer-based organization that's designed by young people and for young people under the age of 35. And its model is really it's an interesting funnel, right? So annually, we'll hold an annual forum, engaging a certain country, bringing together new and old fellows to really conduct capacity building, right? Sharing of knowledge and tools and resources. But what makes it unique is there's a very heavy action planning component, right? So we'll start with that blue sky thinking, generating ideas, and then we drill it down that each fellow by the end of that third day is walking away with a tangible plan of how am I going to go back to my home country and implement an interfaith activity, right? Again, maybe it's organizing a holiday charity drive to collect maybe supplies for newly resettled refugees or immigrants. Perhaps it's knowledge sharing over Ramadan. There's many different, or just addressing climate action in some way, right? So you're picking an action that's relevant for your community, and that context looks different for our fellows in Cameroon versus Pakistan versus in Scandinavia versus South America. So you're designing something that is relevant for your community. And what's powerful there is you're conducting a local activity, but it's more powerful in its volume, right? So we can actively say we've conducted 200 activities over the past 2 years across X number of countries. So I think what's important there is, at the end of the day, again, we're engaging young people, especially other minorities and women, is you want to have an action component built in. So even if you are organizing a dialogue or knowledge sharing, I think being able to reference something tactful that someone can take back to their community and redesign or re-implement is very, very valuable. And at the end of the day, I think the push is moving dialogue to action, right? That's a common theme we often hear about. So being able to engage with that in some way. And I mean, Shahid, you also gave great examples of doing things virtually, right? So one example I can reference is, early 2020, COVID hits, everything shuts down. And for ACWE, we were unable to convene in person, right? That was our flagship program. So we very quickly had to pivot, and we organized a team. And in early 2021, we hosted our first virtual forum. And I believe we brought together about maybe 200 people on a Zoom call. I don't remember exactly. And we had different tracks around policy and action and activism. But we were still able to dig deep, right, and generate good discussion. And hopefully folks walked away with tangible ideas of what to implement. And we also collected policy recommendations that we would then send on to the G20 forums as well. So I think acknowledging your audience, again, meeting them where they're at, being relevant and equipping people with the skills they need to go and do something, that's the most important thing. So I would highlight that as probably the most important idea around just, developing a program for folks.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for mentioning Aqua. And indeed, we met last year. We had the opportunity to see in person, but I'm so happy to see you here again, at least virtually. And as you said, the world is a bit small for the interfaith activists, and I think it needs to be expanded much more. We need to have more people coming in and more people engaging. But you again mentioned something very important: contextually rooted activities, and something that people from the various contexts know the context the best. And this is amazing that Aqua can support people in implementing these kinds of initiatives on the local level, but again, coming on the global level and sharing them and learning from each other, and maybe taking something from one context, putting it in another context, a bit adapted, might work as well. So we have still 18 minutes till the end of our webinar, and we still have one more panelist to answer our last question. And Shahid, I'm again giving the mic to you, and your 4 minutes are on. And could you please unmute yourself? We are not able to hear you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Sorry for that. So I have a great project which I love to share, but I just try to pick some which I think are very close to my heart, and whom help us to get a deep rooted in the community, and why the young people start supporting us. So we started with a very basic activity. We called it diversity tour, which we initiated almost 10 years ago. So we were recruiting youngsters and from different faith, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh. And when we gather a 50 student, and we're spending a whole day, spending 1 hour to each religion places. And we try to ask a difficult question, which we normally cannot ask. So the young people, they try to go and visit physically. Normally, they only listen stories from their elders, from their old generation, that how the different faith looks like, what they do. And it was the first time they're going side by side, and they're spending whole day. And at the end of the day, they talk, they sit in a circle, and they try to explain, and they share that what they were thinking yesterday and what they're thinking today about each other. And that's helped us to develop a safe space and confidence among. So that's the very basic activity which we started, but that's gradually, like, we try to make it more to build their capacity, like to sensitize them and then build their capacity. And then we started a small project to start having a small the grant for the young people, so they can, if they experience something and now they do something back in their community with that, so we help them to do, and they can work there. So but the good news is that we started from there, and the couple of years ago we got a project in collaboration with the USAID and the government of Punjab. And we as a young organization, youngster, we drafted the first ever interfaith harmony policy for the biggest province of Pakistan, that's called Punjab province. And that was a huge accomplishment for us, like as a young organization, when the government and even though the partners, they supported us for this very, very important task, and how we can develop strategies for the tolerance, for the inclusion in the biggest province. And we try to develop all the strategy and pitch to the government, and that's partially approved. And now we are doing the lobby for the formal the approval from the cabinet. So the project which I like to be done with the network of religious and traditional peacemaker in the Finland Church, and that's a dedicated media campaign during the COVID and the post-COVID scenario, when we try to counter the hate speech and how the young people can help people from the different communities. So in this pandemic, they stop doing stigmatization, hate spreading hate speech on social media, and doing the discrimination, but they try to make an inclusive society. And as a nation, we fight for this, and how the religion can help. So we, in that program, in that dedicated media campaign and the project, we done a lot of activities, like the Christian providing the ration to the Muslim families, and the Muslim providing the ration to the Hindu families, to the cross faith helping to each other in this national or the international disaster. And then the finally, I already like the interesting project. We are very excited to launch that very soon. That's how we can use the interfaith dialogue through the visual reality with the people who cannot travel and they are in the difficult situation. How we can interact with them. So that's can be with the people from our neighbor country where we normally we cannot have that opportunity. And even though the people from the different religious countries where the Pakistani youngster they normally cannot have due to the political pressure and the political situation. So we are trying to give them opportunity how they can using the virtual reality they can have a dialogue with them and they try to build the friendship, trust, and the understanding so they can work together for the better tomorrow.
Thank you, Shahid. Thank you again for sharing all the multiple initiatives that you are working on, and especially for mentioning that sometimes even the political reason and the politics can prevent and hinder interfaith dialogue happening on between different religions, but also between different countries due to unresolved conflict or unresolved issues. And I'm sure there is unfortunately a lot of spaces and places like that on the earth. So doing it virtually and helping people at least traveling virtually towards each other is one of the ways how we can do it. So thank you all. I really enjoyed so much. I really learned from each and every one of you. And as I said, now I have a lot of links to visit and to see all of those great initiatives that you were mentioning. And thank you for sharing them in the chat. So I'm sure our audience will be able to access it and to see it. We have some questions for you that came through the Q&A or through the chat. Some of them are partially answered already because you answered them through your inputs on the questions that I posed. But I would like to pose one question that came also through the Q&A, but also in our chat. And it's what donors, what foundations and other institutions can do to support these initiatives and efforts more effectively, like how they can better support, better work with you, better somehow be there for the initiatives. So briefly, now we don't have so much time, but briefly, like who would like to answer this question? And if we have somebody who would like to start first, or we can do the round as we did already for, let's say, 2 minutes. And let's hear from you. Samira, I see you are already unmuted yourself, so please go ahead.
I'm used to the schedule by now, so I instantly volunteered to go first. One thing that donors, foundations, large stakeholders can do is focus on impact rather than numbers. All of us can get into the trap of numbers. We want thousands of participants. We want thousands of activities, but the impact of such almost like machine mechanism of producing kind of an impact is questionable to me. I would urge everyone to focus on the impact that our activities, our intentions do leave in the world. Because in the context where I'm coming from, I cannot say that we have a lack of activities. I say that we have lack of depth in these activities because there is no possible way you can go deep enough to be able to deal with the core issues or to be able to include everyone in all of it. So that would be my plea to everyone in positions where you get to decide whether you're going to have a 5-day conference with 500 participants or a 3-day conference with these 500 participants, but with a lot of more resources put into all of this. Or if you're able to do a project, think about impact versus number. If you are able to, if you're not just an NGO trying to implement activities, but this feels really important, impact over numbers.
Thank you, Samira. Dr. Kadaevshev, would you like to give us your brief answer?
Yes, I will try to be very brief. I agree with Samira about the role of the impact as opposed to the numbers. And one of the things that's really important for me, what I think the donors, foundations, and other multilateral international or institutions can do is to first sit down and listen respectfully to groups, their needs, and their organizations. But that also goes with what impact, what success looks like from ground. We tend to judge a lot of the efforts from the outside perspective, what we think is important to us, who may not be coming from the context. But giving a voice to people to define their goals, objectives, understand their needs, and even, sometimes sort of like what support they need may look very differently than the kind of support that we think they need. I think really we have to start with listening respectfully and willingness to learn from the local communities rather than trying to jump in to save people. That would be my first recommendation.
Thank you, Dr. Kadavci. Sarah, would you like to offer your answer to this question as well?
Yeah, I think to connect Samira and Dr. Kadavci's comments, maybe donors can help with impact measurement, right? We often talk about a weakness of the interfaith or intercultural space is the lack of data fidelity around it, right? Are we tracking, outputs versus impact, right? How do we look at number of attendees to, okay, this has, I don't know, maybe helped bring economic mobility to folks, or an increase in X, Y, and Z, increase in education outcomes, right? So I think donors can play a role in helping bring that expertise to potentially short-staffed or underutilized organizations and help them build that out more thoughtfully. So yeah, being a thought partner to help them design the problem, but offering resources and skills, especially in the impact measurement space. So
thank you, Sarah. Shahid.
Yeah, so quickly, I always, when I meet my partner and donor, I try to convey them that first try to understand about the challenges, not always talk about the success stories, like share the success story, but we really wanted to tell you about the failure which we had when we went to the community and we tried to implement something, because once you know about the challenges, then you would be better understand about the successes, which if though. And then we try to convince, like, if there is no continuity, no sustainability in your approach, so then you cannot change. Like if you have a small project like 1 year and then you change your strategy and you go another city and then you go another city for 1 year and the region, so I think that's not gonna work. Like we have to stay somewhere and we have to take a very small step, but try to be there for sometimes to have a better continuity and commitment, and to work slowly with that community and to try to convince them the narrative which we wanted to build.
Thank you, Shahid. Thank you all, and thank you for bringing this to the table and actually answering this question, how we can be more partners with the donors rather than having like donor and implementer relationship, but doing it more in a partnership and understanding each other and understanding also the importance of impact and the importance of leveling the expectations and it takes time, definitely, especially when working with people, when working on the topics that at some point tend to be sensitive, at some point tend to be very emotional for people, because religion is for many people a very important part of their identity. So we need to have also these expectations and the time span for the impact, the time span for something to happen has to be much longer than one project, or I don't know, 1 year, 2 years, because definitely it takes time, because we're speaking about attitudes, we are speaking about changing the ways how we see things, and that is something that, it takes us a whole life to raise a person, to educate a person, and then it definitely takes us much more as well to somehow sometimes change deeply rooted narratives that are transmitted from generation to generation that you already were mentioning in all of your inputs when answering the question. We have some more questions, and we can't address all of them. We had one question regarding the role of media, for example, what does it play in the interreligious efforts, but also we had a question on do we have some very tangible examples of effective examples of multi-religious collaboration of women and youth? And I think you addressed this question very excellently when you were answering the second and the third question, and giving the very concrete examples of what people are doing and providing us with the links of what people are doing. And people now can actually, visit these links and learn more about the work. And I saw also my name mentioned in one Q&A, and mentioning my leadership in the Religions for Peace in the RFP. And I would just briefly, I'm going actually to abuse my moderator role now and just briefly share this experience. And briefly, I want to tell you about the conference that was happening in Manresa in Spain just 7 days ago. It was organized by Religions for Peace and by the city of Manresa, which is a great example of how local governments on the city level are collaborating with the religious leaders and religious institutions. And I want to say that this whole conference from the very beginnings of the planning, was actually planned in cooperation with young people. There were young people on the planning committee. There were young people on planning the panels, planning workshops during the conference, and also being part of the panels, being part of the workshops, and conducting the panels and the workshops and moderating them. It was not just young people as one young person speaking at the panel just for the sake of having a young person speaking there. And I want to mention the pact that was signed by the government, by the religious leaders, and by young people. And this pact was drafted again together with young people, the mayor of Manresa, young people from the RFP, and religious leaders and women network from the RFP all sat together and drafted this pact. So it was not a pact drafted by the people on the high level and said to young people, okay, now you have to sign this and pledge that you are going to do this or that, but it was actually done in cooperation with young people. And I'm really proud to be a part of this kind of movement, which is gathering religious institutions, religious leaders, but also having young people on the leading positions and women also on the leading positions. And I think this is a model that we can definitely highlight as a positive model of how to give leadership to young people and to women, and actually incorporate their ideas. As Samira said, they ask me, I say, and then nothing happens to it. And now for the end, I would just like to give you very shortly for your remarks, let's say 30 seconds each, if you have a message that you would like to send to our audience, and then we need to close the webinar. So starting from you, Samira, please go ahead.
Closing message. Gosh, I think that every individual has a responsibility and a role to play. Our responsibilities are equal to the opportunities given to us. We should not expect people that we do not allow to speak up to have responsibility. But if we do have a platform, if we do have space, then we should use it appropriately. No event is just an event. No conference is just a conference. No meeting is just a meeting. It goes far and beyond just the space that we are in right now. And a message to younger people and to women. It's bizarre to me that we are considered still a marginalized group of people, even though we are far from being the majority on the face of the earth. But the situation is as it is. It takes time, and let's be patient and let's work together.
Thank you, Samira. Dr. Kadaevci, very briefly.
Yes, very briefly. I think to add that, I think it's really important that we elevate each other and give power to each other voices, and make sure that, because we can only succeed as if we work together, and if we elevate each other. I think whatever divisions there are, we have to really put them aside to work together and to promote each other. What is good for one of us is going to be good for all of us, but as long as we listen and learn from each other.
Thank you. Sarah.
Yeah, do not recreate the wheel, elevate existing work.
Thank you, Sarah. Shahid.
Yeah, I always appreciate what you have, don't complain for everything. So my message to the young people, whatever you have, try to build on that and try to utilize that. And one day you will make an impact and your difference.
Thank you. Thank you all. This was very insightful. I learned so much from each and every one of you. And I hope that our audience enjoyed in the panel as much as I enjoyed. And this is a great note that all of you send these messages, great note to close this webinar. And I would like to thank you as a panelist, our audience, for being a part of the event. We hope to see you on other events. Keep an eye on the social media of Alliance for Peacebuilding, and also check the next breakout panels. And thank you again so much. Have a nice day or rest of your night.
Wonderful meeting all of you.
you.
Bye. Thank you so much for the moderation. It was great. Thank you so much for all the audience.
Great moderation. Yeah, thank you.